Okay. I'm going to end this poll and we'll get started. So I'm Kim Madden. I'm the Director of Family Support through Advocates for Children. I'm joined today by Ross Baker, who's going to be helping out with questions in the chat. There's a Q, I'm sorry, not in the chat, in the Q&A. If you have questions that come up, we'll pause along the way. But when you have questions, put them in the question and answer, and he'll either answer them as we go, or we can stop at certain points and answer them. And we'll also stay on the end and stop the recording if you have some questions you want to ask then. And we have Marley Crane, who's our wonderful ASL interpreter. So thank you, Marley. And one of the first questions that always comes up is, will I get these slides? And yes, we will be sending them out to everyone who registered. It may take a couple of days, but we'll send you a copy of everything. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to go through special education today. We're going to talk about the law, first of all, just some of the basic ideas. And then we'll go through the process from how you ask for an evaluation, consent, the IEP process, and then programs and placements, continuum of services, and then also what to do if things don't go well. So we're going to go through all of these. If you're watching this as a recording later, we're going to have chapter headings in there. So if you're really interested in what happens if I don't get what's on my IEP, you can skip to that. Advocates for Children, just to give you a little bit of background, we're an independent agency and we protect the rights of all New York City students. We have a helpline that you can reach Monday to Thursday, 10 to 4. There's people who answer the phone who speak English and Spanish, and we also have other languages available through a language line. You can also reach out to us through our website. There's a way to write in with a question. We have guides and resources online, and we have a lot of recorded trainings. This is going to be a basic overview of special education. If you have more detailed questions, like your main issue is about related services, we have a webinar on related services, or transportation. We have one on that as well. So we have a lot of different things online, and I would definitely encourage you to check that out. We also do workshops and trainings. So if your school or you're part of a parent group or an organization that would like us to come do a training, we do ask that you have at least 10 to 15 people, but we can often schedule that. And finally, we do provide some free legal services to families that meet our income guidelines when we're able to. That's probably our most requested service. And unfortunately, we can't meet everyone's need, but we do represent many, many families to get what they need in New York City public schools. Okay, so going through the law, and as I said before, this is going to be just a general overview of the laws that are out there. The IDEA is the federal law, and that explains why students have a right to special education and to the services that they need to learn. Section 504 is also a federal law, and I'll go through a little bit about what each one of these requires. And then there's the New York State education laws and regulations, sometimes called the Part 200s. Almost all of these, honestly, are pretty readable. I mean, they're law, so but if you're interested in a particular issue, I would certainly say give it a shot and see if you can read about it online. The chancellor's regulations, that covers a lot more than special education. And then a really great place to understand what the DOE thinks its obligations are is what we call the SOPM, or the Standard Operating Procedures Manual. At AFC, we don't agree with everything that's in there, but it gives you a really good sense as to what they think their obligations are, and it's a great place to start. Section 504 is a law that prohibits discrimination based on disability. So it is not limited to education. Schools must make reasonable accommodations under it. It does apply to parents too. So we've had parents who, use a wheelchair, for example, and can't get into their children's school for parent-teacher conference. they have a right to ask for an accommodation so that they can still meet with their child's teachers. So there's all kinds of different accommodations. Testing accommodations is probably the most common one. Also, nursing services or physical modifications. Many students need the extra support of an IEP, but keep in mind Section 504 might apply as well. The IDEA, I would say one of the main things to understand about the IDEA is that all children through the age of 22 with a disability have a right to a free, appropriate public education. And you might hear that referred to as a FAPE. This field is so filled with acronyms. I'm a parent, and I first started this at Advocates for Children when my son was 3, and I felt like I was learning an entirely different language. So I'm going to try not to speak an acronym without explaining what I'm saying. I'm quite sure I've already messed that up. But free appropriate public education is one of the cornerstones of the IDEA and a really important thing to think about. You also have a right to that in the least restrictive environment, meaning that your child shouldn't be segregated just because they have a disability, and you should have a right to have your child included with other children. FAPE, so going back to the free appropriate public education, that means the programs and services that are designed for your child's unique needs. So for example, although you might want your child included with other children, if your child needs to be in a very specialized program to learn, that's what's the most important. It's supposed to be designed for the individual student to provide a meaningful benefit. It has to help your child progress. Sometimes the phrase that gets tossed around is you have a right to a Chevy and not a Cadillac. That seems like a weird thing to say in New York City, where most of us don't have cars. But you have a right to the subway and not an Uber, maybe would make more sense here. But it means that you don't have a right to the absolute best, but you have a right to what your child needs to progress. And if your child needs whatever is considered the best or the most, this tends to get used as a defense. That's what your child needs. I think maybe a really important way to think about it is the I in IEP, the I in IDEA is individual. And so it's what your individual child needs, not what's easiest for the system as a whole. And the goal in all of this is inclusion. So this law, the IDEA and least restrictive environment, first was passed in the 70s. It first was called the Education for Handicapped Children Act. And at that point, students were often completely excluded from school if they had disabilities. So this is a picture from a protest at that time about, trying to mainstream students with disabilities so that they could actually get an education. And as much as possible, students with disabilities have a right to learn with students who are not disabled. Another thing to keep in mind in terms of your right as a parent, or if you're a professional working with parents, is these laws do require translation and interpretation. This system is tough enough to learn if you speak English, but if you're speaking another language and trying to understand it, it makes it really difficult. And it's important to know that you have a right to have letters, forms, notices, IEPs, and evaluations translated, and that you also have a right to interpretation at school meetings. And that means professional interpretation. They shouldn't be asking you to have your child interpret, or some random person in the hallway who they think speaks the same language. It has to be a professional interpreter. These are the languages that the DOE is required to translate into, and they actually just added this year 3 new languages, Albanian, Uzbek, and Ukrainian. So that's great that they're adding more. I would say that people still struggle to effectuate this right. So one thing you should know is you have a right to complain centrally. Sometimes an individual school doesn't know how to get this done, but if you call the central line or email hello@schools.nyc.gov, you should get some help in getting things translated or in getting an interpreter. Okay, so I'm going to go through the special education process, and I'll go through it from referral all the way through to placement. Um, the first step, of course, is to figure out, whether or not the student needs um, special education. Schools have to do pre-referral interventions. If you're a parent asking for an evaluation, you were past this step, you think your child really needs an IEP, you have no obligation to go through this. You can say, well, you can start providing that, but I want an evaluation now. For schools, they have to show that they've tried something. And that means that they might have provided some academic intervention services or response to intervention. Just basically trying to see if we give your child a little extra help, are they okay? They have to do this if they're going to hold a child back, promotion and doubt. It's not a special education evaluation. There may be some data collected from it, but that's different from an individualized evaluation, and it shouldn't delay the special education process. Okay, so who can make a referral for special education? If you're at the stage where the pre-referral didn't work, you think your child or a child you're working with needs to be referred. Parents, a legal guardian, or a school has an absolute right to do a referral. It's best to do it in writing. Send a letter to the principal, school-based support team. If you're in a private school or not in school right now, the Committee on Special Education. Um, Also, a school is supposed to refer a child for evaluation if they think a child has a disability. It's a legal term called child find, and that means that schools, if they think a child has a disability, and they're in a good place to know, right? They're seeing lots of children. If you're a parent, you're just seeing your own. If they think a child needs an evaluation, they're supposed to start this process on their own, or at least ask the parent to help them. Once a child is referred for evaluation, the school must ask the parent for consent to evaluate. And they're supposed to do this within 10 days. This is actually not a legally mandated time frame. It's in the SOPM, but it is something where there can be delays. So if you're a parent referring your child and you haven't heard back, follow up, follow up, follow up. And they're supposed to ask you for consent. Your consent should be written, voluntary, and informed. If at any point as a parent you decide, you know what, I don't want to do this, you have an absolute right to withdraw consent. They can't put your child in special ed without your consent. But assuming that you do want this and you do consent, within 60 school days, they have to hold evaluations, have an IEP meeting, and then recommend placements and services. 60 school days, keep in mind, can be a lot longer than 60 days. If it's over a school break, like in December or in the spring break, that can be a long time. It can be almost 3 months sometimes. So it's, only business days and days in which school is in session. So in the summer, in July and August, it's actually business days. And once they decide to do an evaluation, they should be testing a student in all areas of suspected disability. They should do a social history. A lot of disabilities are inherited. So if your grandparent had dyslexia and your mom has dyslexia, you may have dyslexia or ADHD or whatever it is. They should also do a psychoeducational evaluation, which means that they're looking at both IQ. In other words, what's your cognitive potential, or according to this test, and then your academic, how you're doing academically, and trying to figure that out. And sometimes there's a mismatch between that. You have a much higher IQ, much lower academics. Maybe you have a learning disability. When it's the other way around, I sometimes think maybe you need a better test because that doesn't make sense if your IQ is lower and your academics are higher. Maybe there's something else going on. Classroom observation. This should be somebody who goes in and sees how a student is doing in the classroom. A recent physical. This is just to make sure there's no other medical issues going on. And also any other areas of concern. And I'll go through in the next slide some other types of evaluations. Finally, if this is a student who's over 14, they should be doing a vocational assessment to try to figure out, what's the long-term plan for this student. Um, Other kinds of evaluations, occupational therapy for somebody with some fine motor issues, physical therapy for more gross motor issues, speech and language therapy, which can be everything from speech impairment to some language-based disorders. For my son, for example, who has a complex neuromuscular disability, his speech language therapist was really helpful in helping him communicate, figuring out what iPad programs he needed to be able to speak. That blends into assistive technology. Assistive technology can be something to help you write, something to help you read, whatever it is. Assistive technology has grown. I think all of us use assistive technology more and more. I think, 10 years ago, you had to pay hundreds of dollars and fight to get a program that would take what you say and dictate it into a Word document. Now half of us send semi-incomprehensible text by using that same technology. We're all voice dictating into our phones. Functional behavior assessment. This is trying to figure out why a student is having behavioral issues and really analyzing it in a therapeutic way, trying to figure out what triggers are going on for a student. And then finally, vocational assessments. And there are some ones that are more in depth, and that might be appropriate. We have trainings on these different topics, but just as a overview, I wanted to mention them. Finally, if a student is bilingual, if they use a language other than English, they have to be testing in that language. Evaluations are free. A school can't say, oh, well, you need an evaluation, go find one. They have to do that. And they should be doing evaluations every 3 years, but up to once a year. You shouldn't be evaluated over and over again. But if your child is having trouble in year 2, you absolutely can ask for a new evaluation. And finally, parents have a right to copies. Okay, sorry, hold on one second. Okay. IEPs, which is the next step after you do the evaluations, you have an IEP. They're legally binding, and I'm sorry, an IEP is an individualized education program that describes, your child's needs, what they need to be in school, and then also, a bunch of different elements about what they need. It is binding like a contract. Everything on the IEP should be given to a student. It's good for at least 1 year. And it's created at a meeting. So sometimes you see them, oops, sorry. Sometimes you see them drafting an IEP and having a really short meeting, basically telling the parent that it's done. That's not true. You're supposed to be sitting there talking through what's in it, having a conversation, recording, all the concerns, including the parent's concerns. And as a parent, don't forget that you were a team member. You're not there as somebody that the school team is presenting it to. You have a right to have your voice included. You know your child really well. There's a section called parent concerns. You can ask that they include your concerns in that section. I know I just said at the meeting, the parent is there. That's really important. You have a right to 7 days 7 days notice. There's also a special education teacher there. If your child might be or is in general education, a general education teacher, a school psychologist, if this is one where an IEP meeting where they're going to be talking about evaluations. And a district representative. Sometimes that's the same as the school psychologist or the special education teacher, but it's somebody who knows the services and the continuum of programs in that district. For a student who's older, they should be including the student. My son loved IEP meetings. I would often be really careful to prep him because, it can be a tough experience for a child, and to let them know what to expect, to let the team know any concerns you have about their participation. We would often sort of split it. So he would come for the first half and then he would leave. And if there was something that we really needed to talk through, I would do that without him there. Um, Finally, any other people that you think might be helpful. You can bring a friend to it. If you're a parent and you're really nervous, bring somebody who you trust, who can help you take notes and who can help support you. Um, some tips for IEP meetings. You should always ask for any reports or evaluations before the meeting. You want to get those in writing. The meeting is not the time to be reading through a psychoed and for the first time discovering that they're saying your child has a disability you hadn't heard of before. It's important to try to get those ahead of time and process it. Um, you want to sign and get a copy of the attendance sheet. One of the things that I always tell parents to do is to date the attendance sheet, like, Kim Madden, November 5th, 2025. I just write that on the attendance sheet. After everybody signed it, I take out my phone and take a picture of it, just so that you know who was there. You should be given a draft of the IEP after the meeting. I'll be honest, that often doesn't happen. You can, in the SOPM, it says they're supposed to give you a copy of the program pages at the IEP meeting. So you can certainly refer to that and ask for that. But finally, get a copy of the finalized IEP. Compare it to your notes. If there's anything in there that seems wrong, raise it right away. Raise it in email if you can, so there's a written trail, and ask that it be corrected. Here are some important sections in an IEP. I would say for a deep dive into what an IEP is, I would recommend looking at our section by section webinar on IEPs, where we go literally page by page and explain things. But these are some sections that I just wanted to talk about. The IEP is really the most fundamental document in special education. So first of all, it's supposed to be describing a student's present levels of performance, including how they did on any evaluations, how they're doing on state tests, how they're doing in the classroom. If for a student who has any kind of behavioral issues, and this doesn't just mean students who are disruptive, it could mean a student who is avoiding school or who's really nervous. The FBA BIP is trying to do an evaluation of when does this behavior occur, and then what kind of processes or practices are we going to put in place to try to help. Annual goals are looking at what's going on for the student, what are we hoping the student will achieve. Recommended program, very, very important towards the end of the IEP, that describes what they're saying your child needs. Related services or assistive technology are in there. Testing accommodations. I would certainly ask if your child might benefit from testing accommodations and make sure you understand all the different types. The transition plan for a child who's older, this is really important. And I think as a parent, it's important to just keep asking questions about this. Promotion criteria, also very important to keep an eye on. If it's standard assessment or alternate assessment. If your child is being alternately assessed, that means your child will not graduate with a diploma. Every year we get calls from parents, and it breaks my heart, whose 11th grader they suddenly realized has alternate assessment, and they didn't realize they weren't working towards a diploma. It's not that you can't catch up then, but wow, that hill just got way steeper. So it's better to understand that, and if you think it's inappropriate, to fight it earlier on, for example. Or if it is appropriate, to make sure that they're coming up with a good, solid post-secondary plan for what happens after high school. Finally, parent concerns. You'll see this in a few different places, but you have a right as a parent to have your concerns documented in there. After the IEP program is created, then you're going to be getting a recommendation. It's called a prior written notice, or a PWN, to throw another acronym at you. It's describing the program. So let's say it's a small class in a community school, a District 1 through 32 school with related services, for example. You also should get a school location letter if your child is going to be changing schools. So you're newly recommended for District 75, for example, or you just moved here, or you're moving from middle school to high school. You should get a school location letter, which actually says quite literally the location where the school is. you definitely want to visit any school that's recommended. I think as a New Yorker, what I always say is, your IEP is saying like you're entitled to a 1 bedroom or a studio, but you want to see that 1 bedroom or a studio. You don't just want to accept it. They are not all the same, as you might know. So you really want to go look and see, what does it look like? Is this going to be an appropriate place? What kind of programming do they have? Um, what does it feel like for my child? All community schools should be able to meet the needs of most students. So if you want to fight to get into a community school as opposed to District 75, you can push for them to provide more services. This is a bit more of a complex thing, and we have this covered in some other trainings. But keep in mind that, I know I said this before, but the program should be individualized to what your child needs. So trying to, of course, you have to work with the school, and you don't want to come in, charging right off the bat, combative parent, but you do want to keep in mind, what does my child need? What do I think is the best environment for it? And know that you have some rights under these laws to try to fight for that. And sometimes it's a matter of getting resources to a school that doesn't know that they might be able to serve your child if they got some more resources from Central. So going up the chain can sometimes work. Um, this is an example of the placement recommendation section. I do think learning to read IEPs can be really complicated at first, but this goes through, District 1 through 32. These are local community schools. They include students without disabilities and disabled students, and they have a range of classes from general education with related services, ICT, which means one special ed teacher, one gen ed teacher, and students with and without disabilities learning together. And then also small classes where it's all students with disabilities. And then finally, next is District 75, which is a school where it's all students with disabilities. And they have a different range of classes, 6 to 1 to 1, 8 to 1 to 1. And the 1 to 1, what that means is take a 6 to 1. The first one is the teachers. So there's 6 students to 1 teacher to 1 aide. On the end of the spectrum for D75, it's 12 students to 1 teacher to 4 aides. And that's a class that's often for students who have significant cognitive disabilities as well as physical disabilities, and they might need a lot of help. Also, there's non-public schools if your child needs that. And these are the examples of the different things you might see on an IEP. Finally, I want to circle in red because every once in a while we do get a question from someone who didn't realize that their child was recommended for a community school or a District 75 school because there's one class program, 12 to 1 to 1. That ratio can exist either in a community school, a District 1 through 32 school, or in a District 75 school. So you want to look very carefully at the placement recommendation. Does it say DOE non-specialized, District 1 through 32, or does it say DOE specialized? DOE specialized means District 75. Finally, what if you think, the IEP is done, but you think the problem is not so much the placement, but you need something totally different? The first step to changing an IEP and getting your child more help is to try to get as much proof as you can about what supports an IEP change. It doesn't just have to be evaluations. Evaluations are very helpful, but if you have teacher write-ups or, these are the test scores, whatever you can pull together to try to explain why you think your child needs different support. Ask in writing, saying what you want for a new IEP meeting. At the meeting, bring people who support you, take notes, really try to push for something. And finally, get a copy of the finalized IEP. And if you need to, go up the chain. Finally, let's say you agree with the program recommendation. You took a school that you thought had the placement, and then you get there and they actually don't have the related services or the tutoring. The SETS. SET stands for Special Education Teacher Support Services. Or they, even worse, they don't have the small class that's on your IEP. The list on this slide is about the different basically vouchers that you can get from the DOE to try to find a private provider. So RSAs are related service authorizations. You can use them with any provider who's licensed with New York State. They do have to go through a process to get on a list if they're not on it. They did just increase the rate, so it's now, I think, $110 an hour. It was 90. And it depends a little bit on the type of related service. The rates are online, so you can check that. For P3s and P4s, that's if you don't get a SETS provider. They also raise the rates for that, so you can look online and ask for that. And finally, for a P1, or sometimes P1s are called Nickerson letters, which has to do with the judge who created this as a class action remedy. If they're not providing you with a small class on the IEP in time, like they violated the timelines, you can get a voucher for a state-approved non-public school. You have to find the school, and it has to match the classification on your IEP. So if your child has autism, their IEP says the classification is autistic, and you find a non-public school, it has to be a non-public school that's licensed to serve students who are autistic. And you have to have a program that's relatively similar. The DOE then approves it, and you can be there for 1 year. It's not an ongoing thing, although we do find that many students who get into a non-public school with a Nickerson are often able to stay. Finally, especially for Nickersons, but for these other two, check expiration dates. If the DOE provides you with services, they didn't give you the small class, but then in November one opens up and you hadn't used the P1, you can't then use it in December. They have an expiration date somewhere in there. Okay, so moving on to due process rights. And at the end, we'll do questions. We have informal dispute resolution and formal dispute resolution. I would recommend almost always trying informal dispute resolution first, unless you know what you want and there's no way you can agree to it. Like your child absolutely needs a private school and a private non-approved school, you think you're going to have to sue for it. It might not make sense to go through the other dispute resolutions. But for anyone else, anyone that's in public school, it makes sense to try this first. This should be obvious, but of course you would want to start with the school. I've worked with parents who, want to go straight to hearing, and then also parents who, are afraid to talk to the school. You have to raise up the problem. It doesn't work to just talk with the teacher about it. You want to go to the principal and the parent coordinator. I think one of the things you learn as a parent of a child with a disability pretty early on is how to advocate and how to, you have to keep fighting politely but persistently. So starting there, one other piece of advice that I learned as a parent in this situation is ask your allies in the school. So I had an issue with the school once where they were taking away my child's para and switching him out for a different para. And my child was so upset. I mean, crying and didn't understand why. And he had a great relationship with this paraprofessional. And I went in storming mad to the teacher before I went to the principal, which was really good. And I was saying, how can she do this? This is legal. As a parent, as an attorney, I don't have a right to a particular para. As a parent, I understood how it was impacting my child. The teacher also, I think, recognized that the new para was not a good fit, that this situation was not fair. And I said, I'm going to go talk to the principal. And she said, look, don't lead with, Kim Madden, attorney. Go and tell her about how your child is impacted by this. And she said something that really stuck with me, where she said, this principal, she doesn't like parents, but she loves kids. Now, not every principal that's true for, but it was really good advice. It stopped me in my tracks. It made me think about it from multiple perspectives. And we all know that as a parent, when you're fighting for your child, sometimes you just get blinders on. I went and talked to the principal and told her about how upset my son was. I didn't need to do anything. She recognized it. She actually really liked my son. I don't think I was her favorite parent, but my son was one of her favorite kids. And she switched the para back. So that was a really great thing. And a lot of the reason I was able to navigate that was by talking to people who were allies in the school who could help me figure out, why is this happening? How do you think I should address this? So for whatever the situation, those are important people to talk to. Finally, though, sometimes it doesn't work. You're not getting what you need from a school, and you might have to go to the superintendent's office. There, you might be talking to the family support coordinator or a district family advocate. If that doesn't work, go up the chain to the central offices. Here's the email and the phone number, and they want to try to resolve things. If none of that, oops, I think I went the wrong way. Here are some emails too. There's, I gave you the general special education at schools.nyc email here, but there's some targeted emails. If your issue is about related services, you can email here. If it's about kindergarten services, and as I said, these will all get emailed to you, so don't feel the need to screenshot it or anything. There's for charter schools, you want to reach out to the CSE chairperson. And finally, for specialized programs, which are the DOE creates more and more specialized programs for students, things like ASD Nest, the AIM program, uh, things like that. You can email into specialized programs. And if you're still having trouble, feel free to call AFC's helpline. The number is here and also on the last slide. If none of this is working and you need to go up a step, you can ask to mediate. That's sort of the least scary way, although a school has to agree to it. And to be honest, mediation works well if you need something from a school and everybody's, just their tempers are flaring. A mediator can calm things down. But for something where you want a private remedy, the school may not be able to agree. You might have to go to an impartial hearing. That's a pretty formal legal process. It's not like going into court, but it's not like contesting a parking ticket either. It's a lot more than that. So you're filing an impartial hearing. There's an impartial hearing officer in charge. You present evidence. You do direct statements, closing statements. So it's more formal. Many parents do this on their own, and there's also we are able to represent some parents, and there's a pretty large private special education bar, so people can hire attorneys. Finally, for some issues, you may want to consider going to the state ed complaint. That's good, especially for something where it's pretty obvious that there's just a violation and the school district should be providing it. So, they're making your child leave class early every day. They're saying you can only stay in school for half days. Your ICT only has one teacher, not two. That's pretty clear in a violation. That's not arguing about details of things. The state might come in if you file a complaint with them, do an investigation, and get the DOE to stop it. I always say it's a little bit like you don't have control over it. You're raising the problem. State ed will come in and try to figure out if they agree. If they do, they're going to work with the school system to fix it. But for example, I talked to a parent once who was not getting full related services. They did a state education complaint and they wanted makeup services, but SED said, or the state said, well, it's not a one-to-one. If you missed 100 sessions, maybe 50 would get you back up to speed. That parent was kind of upset and may have done better at an impartial hearing. So just to keep in mind, there's differences between them. Okay, some final tips. Know that you always have a right to consent to or reject special education. Most of the time people don't want to reject it. They want something different. But keep in mind that is your right. You can always pull your child out. You always also have a right to ask for new evaluations, including independent evaluations. You have a right to fully participate in all IEP meetings. You have a right to have an interpreter who speaks your language and to get documents translated. And you have a right to get in writing any notice before the school changes your child's placement or classification or services. So that's it. Ross, are there any questions that you wanted to raise up? And I'm going to do some polls too for people. It's really helpful if you can take our polls. If I can find them, hold on.
Yeah,
They
there's
help
two.
us know how we're doing. Yep.
Yeah,
Okay,
there's
go
two
ahead.
that I think might be helpful for you to answer live.
Okay, cool. Uh, okay, hold on. Let me do. Oh, you know what? Let me launch this one first too. If you can give us your, let us know if you're comfortable with your race and ethnicity and your child's disability. This is something that our funders do look at, so we can tell them who we're serving. Thank you so much. Okay, Ross, I'm happy to answer while people are doing this. Oh,
Okay.
do you want me to look at it? I can look at it. Hold on.
If you want, I could read them. It's
Yeah,
up
no,
to
I
you.
got it. I found it.
Okay.
Are there services or insurance that cover part of that price? I don't, do you know what that was in connection to?
Yeah, that was referring to vouchers, I believe, and
Uh,
like P4 sets and evaluations.
so typically you have to use the voucher for whatever it is. So my son got, physical therapy through an RSA for years. No, there wasn't like that provider just took the rate. She also, well, she didn't, but I think other people she knew took Medicaid for some of those services. Or, if your provider takes private insurance, you could use it. But typically, it's not like you can add together your private insurance and the RSA rate. That's not how it's supposed to work anyway. Um, if you're able to find somebody and they charge more than that and you can't find anyone else and neither can the school, that may be a situation where you want to file a hearing. Many people do and are often successful. Oh, thanks, Ross. Did you just launch the feedback survey?
Yep.
Great.
And then one more question here.
Sure. Uh, how is it determined when a child should have a one-to-one or when they should be in self-contained? I think that really depends. That's a very individualized determination, and a lot of it depends on, you know, how a child learns, what benefit they might get from being in a less restrictive class. For a child that has a lot of attentional issues but is closer to grade level, a self-contained class, not always, but often is working on a lower level. You might be able to argue that they need a one-to-one who's specially trained in helping them, attend and stay focused. And something like that might work, as opposed to putting them in a self-contained class where, yes, it's less distracting, it's smaller, but are they working on the level that the student is working on? So that would be, the right kind of things to be weighed. Unfortunately, sometimes what we see is a school saying, uh, well, we don't have a self-contained, so we're going to give you a para. And that might not be the right solution for a child that's really struggling way behind. And maybe you need to move to a different school to get the self-contained classroom. Or conversely, a school may have a self-contained and want to just put the child in that. It's mid-year, they're worried about getting paid for a para. So all these different things that can come into play for why a school might be reluctant to recommend or provide something. Um, it's not like you have to always be paranoid that the school isn't acting in your interest, but it's important to keep in mind that you want to advocate for what you think your child needs. And that's a very multi-factored thing. So my son loved school, for example, and we pushed in a lot of support to make sure he could stay there so he could be with his friends. Your child feeling successful, feeling included, feeling welcomed for all of us, honestly, is probably the most important thing. Um, for you to like, or at least the baseline for you to be able to learn. If you're feeling really far behind, you can't keep up, you're getting insecure, it's going to be harder for you to learn. If you're getting bullied, it's harder for you to learn. Um, Conversely, if you're feeling really successful, you love the school, but you actually need a lot of extra help, maybe extra tutoring that's pushed in, maybe individualized tutoring, maybe assistive technology could supplement that and keep you there. So it's very individualized. I hope that makes sense. Um, how is it handled when a student's behavior impinges on other students' rights in the classroom? Okay, hold on a second. It looks like,
I'll answer that question in writing.
okay. Yeah, I think the thing to keep in mind with any advocacy is you can advocate for your own child. but not for another person's child, right? Like, so you want to advocate for what you know your child needs. And that doesn't involve, you know, like maybe your child needs a less distracting place, but you can't say what someone else's kid needs. Um, all right, any other questions going on? Uh, yeah, okay. I'm just reading through and agreeing with your FBA thing. All right. All right, I think we answered that. Anybody else wants to take the survey, please do. They're really helpful for us. And actually at the end, there's some short answer ones. You can tell us if you want other trainings on particular topics, and we really do respond to that. Okay, Ross, do you want to stop the recording and we can see if anyone else has any other questions?
Sure, I could do that. Yeah, there's one more below.
Oh, okay, sorry, I missed it.
It's all good,
Oh,
just came in.
as a special advocate for students' inclusion in the classroom, that's hard to say. I mean, as a special ed teacher, how do we advocate for the students' inclusion in the classroom? Oh, you mean, I mean, I'm not really quite sure. In the ICT classroom, I think that's something that's supposed to happen. If it's an ICT classroom, for example, there are many, many, many different models. My son was in ICT all the way through kindergarten through 12th grade. For me personally, it was a program that I loved. Although I will say that I saw some schools do a much better job at both teachers acted like they were responsible for all students. I think that is the best model, but you have to have time and commitment from both teachers to act that way so that, you know, it should be so you go into a classroom and you can't tell who the special ed teacher is, because that makes all the students feel involved. The worst situation is where there's one teacher and everybody knows that teacher is there for these 4 kids or whoever, you know, 10 kids, whatever it is. That tends not to be a great setup. And I think inclusion is something that is really important across the board. I mean, and I think other teachers are often the best place to learn from this. There are inclusion summits that the DOE holds, and just trying to be as creative as possible. I think field trips are really important, making sure everyone is included, trying to mix up social groups. I think, to be honest, the best way to include students with disabilities is the same way you include all students. Like every learner should feel welcomed there. And, you know, trying to get the entire school to buy into that and not, you know, separating students by something like disability. In the gen ed classroom, yeah. Um, and I'm not a teacher, I'm a parent, so I feel like I know what I've seen and what's worked well. And I would say when it works well from the parent perspective and the kid perspective, it feels like magic. It's just somebody who really um, views all of their kids as learners that are valued and have dignity in the classroom and figures out how to reach them all. Okay.